Yeah. I was wondering, a typical case of angels that's commonly brought up in the Old Testament is, of course, with the Sodom and Gomorrah and Lot and his daughters. That story.
Hmm. Hmm.
Generally speaking, we have like in the story, you have Lot offering up his daughters, and I was wondering, does that sort of say how the relationship with angels and people have been portrayed in some, in some parts of the Bible, and like, is that part of the continuation of a sort of a relationship they have?
Well, there.
And
Go
yeah,
ahead.
oh, and basically, how does this relate to righteousness? Because Lot was called righteous, even though with the whole giving
Hmm.
up his daughters thing.
Hmm. Yeah, we'll start with the first one. You don't have, Lot's. I mean, Lot does offer his daughters, you know, to the to the men of the city. He doesn't offer them to the two angels, but he does offer them to the men of the city to protect these angels. And so, this goes back to this long and, you know, your audience needs to remember this the next time they talk about cultural equivalence. This long tradition in Middle Eastern culture of elevating visitors, elevating hospitality above even your own family members. That's real. I mean, that's really an idea across the board in Middle Eastern cultures. And so what Lot does to protect his visitors, to quote unquote show hospitality, is he offers his daughters to these men, hoping that that'll take care of the problem, which is horrific, but that is the cultural thing to do. Um, we're not really told what vexed Lot to begin with. What was it having to do this? Was it having to leave? Was it just the general sin of the city? Again, we don't really know. So it's kind of hard to know what point to correlate his vexation with and which points to not correlate his vexation with. It just says he was vexed, okay? By the wickedness or, just generally the city. I mean, that's a starting point in my head, but it leaves, questions unanswered.
And here's the
But I want to get to the other sexual element, because there are a number of scholars, who think, they look at this and it's like, okay, when his daughters, get him drunk and commit incest with him, so that because they're without husbands. And again, we don't understand the magnitude because of our culture. We don't understand the magnitude of this culture for women in not having husbands. Basically, if you don't have a husband, you are either going to just die of exposure or you're left to a life of prostitution. It's just not a good situation, for women. And so they're thinking, we need husbands and children, or not husbands, but we need children that are going to be within the family name that attaches us to the family of Lot, and we're going to be okay. And again, we don't understand the sort of patriarchal worldview and culture, especially the situation that it puts women in antiquity. But they do this, and scholars have thought, out of this episode, when they get their dad, to sleep with them, what do we get? We get the Ammonites and the Moabites. And interestingly enough, those two places are going to have giant clan populations later. Now, they're going to get wiped out by the descendants of Esau. This is Deuteronomy 2 and 3, before the Israelites ever get to the Transjordan where these people settle.
oh,
I mean, God is specifically going to say to Moses and Joshua, leave the Ammonites and the Moabites alone. The descendants of Esau came in there. They already took care of the problem with the Rephaim. Just keep going up. And God is specifically leading them through the territory of Moab and Ammon all the way up to Bashan. Why? Because that is where the last of the Rephaim live.
a lot of people don't know about the Esau descendants taking care of them.
Yep. 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 It's easy to read over it, but Deuteronomy 2 and 3. And so scholars look at this and go, you know what? In hindsight, you can look at this episode and say, that this behavior is actually a mimicking of what happened earlier in Genesis 6, even though it doesn't involve, the angels. it's a sexual transgression that leads to, this stuff going on. Now, again, I'm not married to that view. It is a view in scholarship. I'm still wondering about it because, just for the sake of your audience, just so that they know that they're interested. There are people who wonder if this is the point of Genesis 19, is it also the point of Paul's comments in Romans 1? Is there something to be said here in 2 Peter 2 when Peter mentions the angels that sin and then also loops in the Sodom story? Is the point here with the men beating on Lot's door to get after the two angels that they think are men, instead of just instead of it being about a homosexual relationship, is it actually about that kind of relationship with angelic beings? In other words, is it another mimicking of Genesis 6 in that way? So there's a lot of stuff floating around in Genesis 19 that people wonder about because of how it plays out in Israelite history.
Also, I think we keep going all over the place, but there's also a certain legend or something you might want to call it that says that Azazel or Azrael, as they call him, ended up being Esau's guardian angel.
Yeah, I've not heard of that. I've not heard of that. Can you pull that out of your head what the source of that is? Like what, a text or something?
I don't know, just
because that would be interesting.
I briefly came across it on Wikipedia, but Wikipedia is generally garbage. So,
it could be looping into something worthwhile though. That's interesting. I'll have to look at that. That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, generally with the whole Lot and his daughter story, I've always liked to emphasize the notion of how, because I think that's a problem that I get with a lot of evangelicals, where they don't sort of get how important hospitality was in the ancient times.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact of the matter is, with hospitality, is that there was often a connection with, that it could always possibly be a deity that could be trying to test you, to see what you would.
I follow what you mean. Yeah.
And if you don't, because I think I've noticed this happens in Greek mythology, and this is a common theme where basically you'll have a deity or you'll have one of his messengers come down and, basically test the citizens to see if they'll be hospitable. And when they're not, they just wipe out the city. So,
the idea generally gets picked up in Hebrews 13. Mm-hmm. Where he says, "Don't neglect, to show hospitality to strangers, because some have entertained angels without knowing it." So that the idea of a visitation being kind of lurking behind hospitality, maybe there's a connection there.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good thing to notice, because if you do insert that into the Lot story, and obviously people would have known that, like even people of Sodom and Gomorrah would have known that sort of thing, where there could be a messenger lurking, but yet they just still didn't care. They still wanted to do what they wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that adds a sort of another layer to it.
Yeah, it makes it even more heinous, if that's the case.
Mm-hmm. I just think it's an interesting food for thought sort of thing to just think about with the culture.